Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Today's story is all about love, mystery, and betrayal, and it's sure to keep you hooked. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Part 1. Subtle Changes. Robert and Martha had been together for over 20 years. They met at a university party back in the early 90s, and from that moment, their lives intertwined in a way that seemed unbreakable. They were the quintessential couple that everyone around them admired. Robert was a lawyer, sharp, focused, and successful, while Martha worked as a schoolteacher, devoted to nurturing the minds of young children. They had built a life full of warmth, raising two wonderful children, and their home was a symbol of stability and love. Most people who knew them thought of them as a fairy tale couple, always smiling, always together, always happy. However, over the last few months, something started to shift. It wasn't noticeable at first, but as time went on, Robert began to sense a change in Martha. He noticed that she was spending more and more time at work and less time at home with him. The phone calls at night became shorter, and their usual quiet dinners together turned into rushed meals or, more often than not, solitary dinners. It wasn't that they had been fighting, quite the opposite, in fact. The few times they did sit down together, everything seemed fine, almost too fine. There was an air of detachment that Robert couldn't put his finger on. At first, he chalked it up to stress from work or perhaps the pressures of raising their children. He understood that life had its demands, and maybe Martha had simply become too caught up in her own responsibilities. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, Robert's unease grew. The small moments that they once shared, late-night conversations about nothing in particular, the quiet walks around the neighborhood were slipping away. In their place was a cold, palpable silence. It was like the distance between them was growing, but no one was willing to talk about it. One evening, when Robert came home from work, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Martha's purse was lying on the kitchen counter, a sight that wasn't out of the ordinary. What struck him, though, was the faint scent of perfume, stronger than usual, lingering in the air. It was a scent he had never smelled before. When he asked Martha about it later that night, she brushed it off with a quick laugh, saying it was a new fragrance she had bought while out shopping. Robert, though, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. A few days later, while taking a late walk around the block, Robert saw something that caught him completely off guard. As he passed a local cafe, he spotted Martha sitting at a table, laughing and talking intimately with a man he didn't recognize. They seemed so comfortable with each other, their laughter echoing down the street. Robert froze for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. The man was older, but his body language was unmistakably flirtatious. Martha's face, typically reserved in public, was glowing with a warmth that Robert hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't that Martha hadn't had friends over the years. Robert knew she was a social person, but this felt different. There was a familiarity between them, something more than just a casual conversation. Robert, his heart racing, stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to confront her or embarrass her in front of a stranger. But the scene was enough to set his mind spiraling. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Robert. He tried to shake off what he'd seen, telling himself that it was probably nothing, that he was just overreacting. But his gut told him otherwise. The warmth in Martha's eyes when she looked at this man, the way she seemed to light up, was that the same woman he had fallen in love with so many years ago? Could it be that she was hiding something from him? Or had he been too blind to see the cracks forming in their marriage? Robert didn't know what to think. Every time he tried to bring it up with Martha, she would laugh it off, assuring him that everything was fine. She claimed she was just stressed with work and that he had nothing to worry about. But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something she wasn't telling him. It wasn't just the mysterious perfume or the strange encounter in the cafe. It was the way Martha had become distant, almost cold. The woman he had known and loved seemed to be slipping away from him, and no matter how hard he tried to reach out, she seemed to be pulling further and further away. The days stretched into weeks, and Robert's anxiety grew. He could no longer ignore the signs. He had been in this relationship long enough to know when something was wrong. And now he was beginning to question everything. His marriage, his trust, and even himself. Was he imagining things? Or was Martha hiding a truth too painful for him to confront? Part 2. The Unseen Truth. The following week, Robert's anxiety only grew. Every evening, after work, he found himself watching Martha more closely. Her movements seemed more deliberate, as if she was consciously avoiding him or worse, hiding something. Even in the moments when they shared their usual rituals. Making dinner together, sharing a glass of wine, the air between them felt charged, but not in the way it used to. There was an undeniable tension, a distance that had grown between them, one that neither of them seemed to address. One night, as Robert sat on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine, he heard Martha's phone buzz from across the room. Normally, he wouldn't have paid it any attention, but this time, he couldn't help but notice the name that flashed across the screen, Greg. It wasn't a name he recognized. Martha had always been open about her friends, but this person seemed new, and the smile that briefly crossed her face when she checked the message didn't go unnoticed. He tried to dismiss the unease that crept up his spine. Maybe it's just a colleague, he thought. She has a lot of work contacts. It's nothing. But that nagging feeling refused to leave. That night, when Martha went to bed, Robert couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of what he had seen in the cafe, and now the mysterious message. He tried to shake it off, but it felt like something was unraveling beneath the surface of his marriage. The next day, after dinner, Robert finally decided to confront Martha. He couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when his gut was telling him otherwise. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the usual hum of the dishwasher in the background, when he brought it up. "Martha, can we talk for a minute?" he asked gently, trying to sound calm, though his voice betrayed his nerves. Martha looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course, what's on your mind?" she replied, her voice sweet, but with a trace of hesitation. Robert took a deep breath. "I've been noticing some things lately, things that don't add up, and I don't want to keep ignoring them because I care about us too much. I saw you the other day in the cafe with someone. He stopped himself, feeling the words hang in the air. "Who's Greg?" Martha's face froze. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes flickered, and Robert caught the faintest flash of guilt in them before she quickly masked it with a neutral expression. "Greg's just a friend, Robert. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this," she said, her voice soft but defensive. "He's a colleague, someone I've been working with on a project. We talk sometimes after work. It's nothing, I promise." Robert didn't believe her, but he didn't want to push her too hard just yet. He had seen the way her demeanor changed when he asked about Greg. It wasn't the answer he had expected, and it certainly didn't put his mind at ease. "So, there's nothing going on between you two?" he pressed. Martha sighed, clearly frustrated. "No, Robert. Why do you keep bringing this up? We've been through so much together. Why can't you just trust me?" Trust. The word stung. Robert had trusted her for years. How could he not? But now, it felt as if trust was slipping through his fingers, as fragile as glass. He didn't want to sound accusatory, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "I do trust you, Martha, but when things start feeling off, I can't help but question it," he said, his voice softer now, laced with vulnerability. "I love you, but something's changed. You're distant, and I don't know how to fix it." There was a long silence between them. Martha's eyes darted away for a moment, and when she looked back, her face was a mix of sadness and frustration. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel this way," she whispered. I don't know how to talk about this. I don't even know where to start." Robert's heart sank. The words he'd been dreading seemed to hang in the air, unspoken but looming. He wanted to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but the emotional wall between them felt insurmountable. "Start with telling me the truth, Martha," he said gently, his voice filled with concern. "What's really going on?" Martha's eyes filled with tears as she finally spoke, her voice breaking. "I don't know if you'll understand, Robert. I don't want you to see me differently. I've been struggling with my weight. I know it's silly, but I feel like I'm losing control. Like I'm not the same woman you fell in love with. The words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. He had no idea. All these weeks, he had been consumed by doubts about another man, about a shift in their dynamic, when the real problem had been something far more painful and personal for Martha. She continued, her voice shaky. I've gained weight over the last few months, and I'm terrified you won't find me attractive anymore. I've been so focused on that, I've pushed you away. I stopped wanting to be intimate because I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't want you to see me like this. Robert sat there in silence, taking in her words. His heart broke for her. He had always reassured her that she was beautiful no matter her weight, but it seemed like his words hadn't reached her. The way she felt about herself was overshadowing everything. I think you're beautiful, Martha, he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. I've always thought you were beautiful. Nothing about that has changed. But Martha shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. It's not about what you think. It's how I feel about myself. And I don't know how to change it. Robert took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. You don't need to change for me, Martha. You're perfect just as you are. But we need to work through this together. I don't want us to drift apart. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, Robert. I should have told you sooner. I've been so caught up in my own insecurities that I didn't even see what I was doing to us. They sat in silence for a few moments, both feeling the weight of the conversation. Robert knew this wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for their relationship. It was time to rebuild the trust, not just between them, but within Martha herself. Part 3. Facing the Truth. The next few days after their conversation were filled with an emotional heaviness. Robert did his best to reassure Martha, but the truth was, he still felt unsure of how to handle everything. He wanted to fix things, wanted to show her that she was still beautiful and deserving of love, but he realized that healing wasn't something that could be rushed. He needed to be patient, not only with Martha but also with himself. Martha, on the other hand, seemed to be battling her own demons. The conversation they had opened the floodgates, but she still wasn't ready to fully accept the help Robert was offering. Every time he reassured her, she would thank him with a small, uncertain smile but retreat inwardly. She had been carrying the burden of her insecurities for so long, it was hard for her to believe that Robert's words were true. One evening, after dinner, Robert suggested they go for a walk. It had been their tradition for years to take walks after dinner, just to unwind and talk about their day. It wasn't the same as it used to be, though. There was a quiet tension between them now, something that hung in the air like a thick fog. Robert could sense it, but he wasn't ready to give up on their routine. As they walked down their quiet street, Robert could feel the weight of the silence between them. He wanted to reach out, but he didn't know what to say. Martha's gaze was focused ahead, but she wasn't really looking at anything, just lost in her thoughts. Martha, Robert said gently, breaking the silence. I need to know you believe me when I say that you're beautiful. I don't want to keep telling you. I want you to feel it for yourself. I want you to know that no matter what, I'm here. We're in this together. Martha stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't know how, Robert. I don't know how to stop feeling this way about myself. I feel like I've failed you. I haven't been the woman you deserve. Robert gently took her hands in his. Martha, you haven't failed me. We've been through too much together for me to just give up now. This is just a bump in the road, and we'll get through it. But you have to believe me. You don't need to change for me. I love you exactly as you are. We've spent over 20 years building something beautiful, and this is just another challenge we face together. Martha's shoulders shook with the weight of her emotions. I've been so afraid, Robert. So afraid of losing you. But I've been pushing you away instead of letting you in. I'm scared that I'm not the woman you fell in love with anymore. Robert pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Martha, I love you. All of you. And nothing about that has changed. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. And I want to help you find your way back to feeling good about yourself. But we have to do it together. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, They stood there in the quiet of the night, just holding each other. The weight of Martha's insecurities didn't disappear in that instant, but Robert knew that it was a start. She needed time to heal, to learn to accept herself again. But he was willing to wait, to fight for her, because he knew that the love they shared was worth every effort. The following week, Robert decided to take a different approach. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to heal Martha's wounds. She needed to experience love in action. So, he began planning small surprises for her. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful gestures that would remind her of how much she was loved. He started with little things. He made her breakfast in bed, something they hadn't done in years. He took her out for a walk through the park where they had their first date, reminiscing about the beginning of their journey together. It was these simple moments that helped bring them closer, allowing Martha to slowly open up. But it wasn't just Robert who was working on their relationship. Martha also began to take small steps on her own. She scheduled an appointment with her doctor to talk about her weight and the changes in her body. She started taking small walks by herself and was slowly making changes to feel better physically. Not because Robert asked her to, but because she realized that she needed to do it for herself first. One night, after a particularly long and emotional day, Robert came home to find Martha sitting on the couch, a soft smile on her face. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a newfound confidence. "I signed up for a yoga class," she said, her voice tentative but full of hope. "I know it's a small step, but I think it'll help me feel more like myself again." Robert's heart swelled with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Martha. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, every step of the way." Martha smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know. I needed to believe in myself again." They sat together that night, talking more openly than they had in a long time. Martha was still on her journey to self-acceptance, but with Robert's unwavering support and love, she was beginning to see the possibility of healing. And Robert, for the first time in months, felt hopeful again. He had never stopped loving her. But now, he could see that Martha was slowly starting to love herself too. Part 4. Shattered Trust. It had been a few weeks since Martha signed up for her yoga class, and slowly but surely, the warmth and comfort that once defined her relationship with Robert were starting to return. While Martha still had her doubts and insecurities, she was learning to put herself first. She had started to look at herself with a bit more kindness, even if she didn't always believe it. And Robert, his love for her remained as strong as ever, and with every step she took toward healing, his faith in their relationship grew deeper. However, nothing had prepared him for what would happen next. It was an ordinary Thursday evening when everything began to change. Robert came home after a long day at work, feeling the usual weight of the world on his shoulders. He had just finished a big case and was looking forward to a quiet evening with Martha. He opened the door to their home, expecting to hear the comforting sounds of Martha humming to herself in the kitchen or the soft click of a book she was reading. Instead, he found the house eerily quiet. "Martha?" he called out, but no answer came. He dropped his bag by the door, his thoughts immediately shifting to worry. She had been out with a friend earlier that day, something she had mentioned to him briefly over breakfast, so he assumed she would be back soon. He decided to wait, pacing lightly around the house, checking the clock. As the minutes ticked by, his mind began to race. After what felt like an eternity, Robert finally heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. When Martha appeared, she looked different. Her face was flushed, and there was a noticeable unease in her eyes. She seemed hesitant, almost guilty. "Hey," Robert said, forcing a smile, trying to mask the worry building inside him. "You okay? You look, well, a bit off." Martha avoided his gaze, walking past him into the living room. She sat down, rubbing her temples like she was trying to stave off a headache, but Robert noticed the tension in her body. His smile faltered. "I'm fine," she muttered, though her voice sounded distant. "I just had a long conversation with Greg." Greg, that name again. Robert's stomach twisted. He had tried to be patient with Martha, to trust her when she said there was nothing between them, but the nagging feeling was still there, a suspicion that refused to die down. Greg? He asked, his voice almost too calm. You two have been spending a lot of time together lately. Martha shot him a brief glance, and Robert could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes. It's nothing, Robert. Really, it's just been work stuff. He sat down next to her, trying to remain composed, though his insides were churning. I don't know, Martha. I've noticed that you've been distant, more than usual. And He paused, unsure of how to say what was weighing on his mind. You promised me that nothing was going on, and yet I can't shake the feeling that something's off. Martha shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. Her eyes were cast downward, not meeting his. Then, almost in a whisper, she spoke. I don't know what's happening anymore, Robert, she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't know how to explain it. Robert's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment. He needed the truth, and it seemed that Martha was finally on the verge of opening up. Martha, he began, his voice gentle but firm. You can tell me. I've been patient. I've been understanding. But if there's something you need to say, if there's something you've been hiding, now is the time. She swallowed hard, and for a brief moment, it seemed like she might speak. But then her eyes welled up with tears, and she turned away from him, unable to look him in the eye. I'm so sorry, Robert, she whispered through her sobs. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I've been seeing Greg. Not just for work. It started a few months ago, after everything felt like it was falling apart with us. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't. I thought maybe I could find someone, that made me feel good again, made me feel wanted. Robert's breath caught in his chest as the words hit him like a slap. His mind raced, and for a few moments it was as if time stood still. He had been right. He had known deep down that something was off, and now he had the truth laid bare before him. It wasn't just about distance or insecurity. It was about betrayal. I never wanted to hurt you, Robert, Martha continued, her voice breaking. You've always been there for me, and I've never stopped loving you. But I don't know why I did it. I felt so lost. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can. Robert sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in his mind. He felt numb, like his entire world had come crashing down around him. For years, he had trusted Martha with everything. His love, his life, his heart. And now it felt like all of it had been shattered. The person he thought he knew, the person he had spent 2 decades with, had betrayed him in the most intimate way. Why, Martha? Robert finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you come to me first? Why didn't you tell me what was going on? I was afraid, Martha said, her voice hoarse with emotion. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of losing everything. So I ran to Greg because he made me feel seen, made me feel like I wasn't just a wife, a mother, a teacher. He made me feel like I was still something. But I never wanted this to happen. And now, I've lost everything. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. Robert's heart broke for her, but it also shattered for himself. He couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that it was happening right before his eyes. Part 5. The Aftermath. Robert sat frozen, the weight of Martha's confession pressing down on him like a heavy stone. His mind was racing, but his body felt numb. The tears that streamed down Martha's face only seemed to deepen the wound. She had confessed. She had finally admitted what he had feared for so long. But hearing it out loud, hearing her acknowledge that she had betrayed him, felt like a gut punch that left him speechless. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but the sound of Martha's quiet sobs filling the room. Robert could hardly breathe. The love he had always felt for her, the deep connection they had built over 20 years, now seemed so fragile. Everything that had seemed perfect, so unshakable, was crumbling before him. He didn't know how to react, how to respond to the woman he had loved for so long, the woman who had just confessed to having an affair with another man. I never wanted to hurt you, Martha said again, her voice barely audible, her body shaking with the effort to speak. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just so lost, Robert, so unsure of myself. You were always so busy with work, and I felt invisible. I felt like I was fading away. Robert's chest tightened at her words. He knew that their relationship had changed over the past few months. He had seen the signs, but he had never imagined it would lead to this, her turning to someone else. A part of him wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that they could get through this together. But another part of him felt an overwhelming wave of anger and betrayal, feelings he didn't know how to manage. You were never invisible to me, Martha, Robert finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I've always loved you. You are everything to me. But you chose to go to Greg instead of talking to me. You shut me out, and you betrayed me. Martha looked down at her hands, her fingers ringing together nervously. I know. I'm so sorry, Robert. I should have come to you. I should have told you how I was feeling, how much I was struggling. I was just too afraid that you'd reject me, that you wouldn't see me the same way anymore. The room felt cold as Robert processed her words. It was clear to him now that Martha hadn't just been distant physically. She had been emotionally withdrawn as well. She had kept her insecurities buried deep inside, afraid to confront them, and in doing so, had distanced herself from him more and more. And when Greg had come into her life, offering her the validation she so desperately needed, she had allowed herself to fall into his arms. I never stopped seeing you, Martha, Robert continued, his voice strained. I've always loved you for who you are, not for the way you look or how much weight you've gained or lost. But you pushed me away, and you went to someone else. I don't know if I can just forget that. Martha shook her head vigorously, as if trying to convince herself as much as Robert. I never wanted to hurt you, Robert. I swear. I thought it was just a friendship at first, just a way to talk to someone who understood me. But it grew into something more than I ever imagined, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to fix myself before it was too late. Her words were raw, laced with regret. Robert could see how deeply she was suffering, but it didn't change the fact that she had crossed a line. The trust they had built over 2 decades had been shattered, and no amount of apologies or reassurances could erase that. Martha, Robert said quietly after a long pause, I need some time to think. I don't know what to say right now. I don't know if I can just move past this. I need time to process everything. Martha nodded, her face crumpling with emotion. I understand. Take all the time you need. I don't expect anything from you right now. I need you to know how sorry I am. I've ruined everything, and I don't know how to make it right. Robert stood up slowly, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. He had loved Martha for so long, but love alone didn't feel like enough to repair the damage that had been done. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and right now, that foundation had been cracked beyond recognition. I need space, Martha, he said softly, his voice thick with pain. I don't know what I need right now, but I can't stay here and pretend everything is okay. I need to figure out if we can even move forward from this. Martha's sobs filled the room as Robert turned and walked toward the door. She reached out, but he couldn't bring himself to look back. He needed time to clear his head, to think about what he wanted and what he could live with. He needed to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Robert's mind swirled with emotions he could hardly understand. He had always believed that love, honesty, and communication were enough to overcome anything. But now, he was questioning everything he had known about their marriage, about Martha, and about himself. Was this the end of their relationship? Or was it just another chapter in their long journey together? Was it possible to rebuild the trust that had been lost? And, most importantly, could he ever look at Martha the same way again? These questions gnawed at him as he walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, unsure of where he was headed or what he would find when he returned home. Part 6. The Turning Point. The days that followed Robert's confrontation with Martha were filled with an unsettling quiet. Robert spent most of his time alone, processing the events that had transpired, trying to make sense of everything. The house that had once felt like a warm haven now felt like a cold, empty shell. He found himself walking through rooms that used to be filled with laughter and shared memories, but now they felt distant, like echoes of a life that had been altered irrevocably. Martha, for her part, had respected his need for space. She stayed out of Robert's way, keeping to herself while he tried to find clarity. She seemed to be wrapped in her own grief, but Robert couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was also quietly desperate to fix what she had broken. For the first time in years, Robert felt unsure about everything. He had built his life around Martha, their children, their home, and their shared dreams. He had trusted her implicitly, and yet that trust had been shattered. He couldn't stop thinking about the hurt, about how she had sought comfort in the arms of another man, and how her actions had made him question everything he believed in. One evening, after several days of not speaking to Martha much, Robert decided he couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. He had to face the truth, even if it was painful, and figure out whether or not there was any chance of saving their marriage. It was a quiet night when he finally sat down with Martha in the living room. She had been sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, though she wasn't really watching. Robert could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the hollow look that seemed to reflect the emotional toll the past week had taken on her. "Martha," he began softly, sitting beside her. His voice was steady but laced with emotion. "I've had some time to think. I've been thinking about everything you've told me, everything we've been through, and I need to know where we go from here. I need to know if there's any chance of us fixing this, of me ever being able to trust you again." Martha turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She hadn't been expecting him to reach out first, but she was relieved that he had. It was clear she had been waiting for this moment, for Robert to make a decision about their future. "I understand why you need time," she said quietly, her voice raw. "I know that I've hurt you, and I don't know how to make it right. I've been thinking about what I've done, and I don't even recognize the woman I've become. I'm so sorry for betraying your trust." Robert nodded, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that she truly regretted what had happened and that she could be the woman he had fallen in love with once again. But the scar of betrayal wasn't something that could easily be wiped away. "I need more than just apologies, Martha," Robert said, his voice breaking slightly. "I need to know that this isn't just about guilt, that you're not just saying what I want to hear. You've got to show me that you understand the depth of what you've done, that you're willing to fight for us, for this marriage." Martha's face crumpled, her sobs soft but steady. "I will fight for us, Robert. I don't want to lose you. I've been so afraid of losing myself that I lost sight of everything that mattered. I thought I could fill the void with Greg, but now I see how wrong I was. I never meant to hurt you." Robert could see the sincerity in her words, but the hurt, the deep wound of betrayal, was still there, and he knew that healing would take time. "I don't know, Martha," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I want to believe you. I really do. But I can't just forget this. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. You were the person I trusted most in the world, and you broke that trust." Martha wiped her tears, her eyes full of regret. "I understand. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, and I'm not expecting everything to go back to normal overnight. But I want to try, Robert. I want to rebuild what we had. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I can be the wife you deserve." Robert sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about her words. The pain of her betrayal was still fresh, but he had spent his entire adult life with her. Their shared history, their love, the family they had built. It was hard to ignore. The question now was whether they could move past this. Could they rebuild the trust that had been broken? "I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive you just yet," Robert said finally, his voice soft but resolute. "But I am willing to try. I think we need to go through this together, step by step. We can't just jump back into things. We need to rebuild what we've lost. And it's going to take time. But I'll give us that chance, if you're willing to work for it." Martha nodded, a fragile smile forming on her lips. "I'll do anything, Robert. I'll prove to you that I'm worthy of your trust again." As the night wore on, they continued to talk. It wasn't easy, and there were still many tears and doubts. But in that conversation, something shifted. Robert didn't know if they would ever fully recover from the pain of Martha's betrayal, but he knew that the first step toward healing had been taken. They didn't have all the answers, but they both agreed that the journey wasn't over. It wasn't going to be easy, and the scars would never fully disappear. But maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something stronger than before. Part 7. A Test of Time. The days following Robert and Martha's conversation were filled with quiet reflection and tentative steps toward healing. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations of love. Instead, they spent their time in small, quiet moments, allowing themselves to slowly rebuild the trust that had been shattered. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road they had decided to walk together. For the first time in months, Robert noticed the subtle changes in Martha. She was no longer as distant. While still carrying the weight of her guilt, she had begun to open up more to him. She would share small moments of her day, telling him about her thoughts, her feelings, her struggles. And while Robert was still hurt, he could see that she was trying, that she was taking the steps needed to rebuild their relationship. Martha had also started seeing a therapist. She realized that her struggle with self-worth and body image had contributed to her actions, and she wanted to address those issues head-on. Robert supported her decision, though he knew it would take time for her to work through everything. And even though they both longed for the connection they once had, they both knew that healing required patience. There were still hard days, of course. Days when the weight of the betrayal resurfaced, when Robert would find himself questioning everything again. But he was determined not to let the past define their future. They had been through so much together, and he wasn't ready to give up on their love. Not yet. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft shade of orange, Robert decided it was time to take another step forward. He had been thinking about the future, about what life could be like if they really worked on things. He realized that they needed to find joy again, to reconnect in a way that wasn't centered around the pain of the past. He knew that rebuilding their bond would take time, but it was crucial to find a way to feel like a couple again, to rediscover the things they had once loved about each other. "Martha," Robert said, his voice gentle but filled with intent, as they sat together on the porch one evening. "I've been thinking about something. We've been through so much, but I don't want to just survive this marriage. I want to thrive. I want us to find joy again, the kind of joy we had when we first met. The laughter, the lightness. We've lost it somewhere along the way, and I want us to find it again." Martha turned to face him, her eyes soft with gratitude. She could see the sincerity in his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. "I want that too, Robert. I've missed the way we used to laugh together, the way we used to talk about our dreams. I don't know if we can go back to what we had, but I want to try. I don't want to just sit in this pain forever. I want to heal." Robert reached for her hand, his grip firm but tender. "We can't go back, Martha, but we can go forward. We can build something new, something better, together." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of regret or guilt. They were tears of relief. Relief that they were moving forward, that, despite everything, they still had the chance to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, Robert and Martha began to take small steps toward rediscovering the joy they had once shared. They started doing things together again. Things they used to enjoy, like cooking dinner together, watching their favorite shows, and going for walks around the neighborhood. They didn't rush it. They took their time, savoring the moments they had with each other, no longer focused solely on the past but rather on what they could build moving forward. Martha continued her therapy sessions, and Robert also sought guidance from a counselor, as he realized that he needed help navigating the complexity of his emotions. They both understood that it wasn't just about repairing their marriage, it was about repairing themselves first. They needed to heal individually before they could heal together. There were still difficult moments when Robert would feel the sting of betrayal or when Martha would feel overwhelmed by her insecurities. But each time, they leaned on each other, supporting each other through the tough days. One afternoon, as they sat on their couch, Robert turned to Martha with a smile. "You know, we've been through hell and back, but I think we're starting to find our way again. We're not perfect and we're not going to be, but we're still here, and that means something." Martha smiled back, her heart light with gratitude. I never thought we'd get to this point. I thought I had ruined everything. But here we are. And I know we've got a long road ahead. But I believe we can make it. We just have to keep trying. We have to keep choosing each other. Robert nodded, squeezing her hand. I'll choose you every day, Martha. I'm not going anywhere. The quiet of the evening settled around them as they sat together, their hearts in sync, stronger than they had been in a long time. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't a resolution to the pain or the scars left behind. But it was a beginning. A new beginning, one built on honesty, trust, and the willingness to keep fighting for each other. They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to walk forward, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Together. Part 8. A New Beginning. As the months passed, Robert and Martha continued their quiet journey toward healing. They had become accustomed to the ebb and flow of their relationship's new rhythm, one that was slower and more intentional than before. It wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past seemed to creep in and threaten to undo the progress they had made. But through it all, Robert and Martha remained committed to their shared goal, to rebuild, to trust again, and most importantly, to love each other with the honesty and openness they had long been missing. Martha's therapy sessions were helping, though the process was not as quick or as straightforward as she had hoped. There were days when she felt like she was making great strides, and other days when it felt like she was taking 2 steps back. But each time she fell short, Robert was there. He was there with patience, with understanding, and with unwavering support. As for Robert, the process of healing was also slow. The pain of the betrayal had been deep, and although he was learning to trust again, there were days when he would wake up with a pang in his heart, remembering the hurt, the confusion, and the fear. But each day he reminded himself that trust was earned, and, just as Martha was working to earn his trust again, he was working to earn his own healing. The path wasn't linear, and that was something he had to accept. The couple began doing more things together outside of their routine. Small trips, weekend getaways, and quiet dinners. It was their way of reconnecting without the pressure of expectation. They needed to rediscover the joy they had once found in each other's company. They didn't need grand gestures or sweeping declarations of love. What they needed was to be present for one another, to find peace in the simplicity of life together. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Robert surprised Martha with a picnic in the park. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was something they hadn't done in years. They spread out a blanket on the grass, surrounded by the fading warmth of the late summer sun. Robert had packed sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine. Nothing fancy, just simple comfort. As they ate, they talked. They talked about their children, their hopes for the future, and the memories they had made together. And, for the first time in a long time, Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There was something about the quiet normalcy of it all that brought a sense of peace. They weren't trying to fix everything all at once. They were just being together. Martha took a deep breath and smiled as she leaned back against the grass. You know, I've missed this, she said, looking over at Robert. I've missed us. Robert smiled back, his heart swelling. Me too. I think we've both been so focused on the wrong things that we forgot how simple happiness could be. It's not about perfection. It's about being here together. For a moment, they sat in silence, just enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. The air was cool and crisp, and the world around them felt calm. It was the kind of moment that had been missing from their lives for so long. A moment of peace, of contentment, of hope. As the night fell, they packed up their picnic and made their way home. For the first time in a long time, Robert felt like they were on the right path again. It wasn't a perfect path, he knew that. There would still be tough times ahead. But as they walked side by side, hand in hand, he felt that familiar sense of connection return, and it gave him hope for the future. The following months brought continued growth. Martha's insecurities were still present, but they were no longer as overpowering. She had started to embrace herself more fully, recognizing her worth without needing the external validation she had sought so desperately in the past. She began to see herself not just as a wife or a mother, but as an individual, someone deserving of love and respect. Robert continued to support her in every way he could, but he also realized that healing meant allowing Martha the space to find her own way. They no longer focused so heavily on the past, but instead on what lay ahead. Their communication was stronger than ever, and they both recognized that, though their journey had been difficult, it had made their bond even more resilient. One evening, Robert and Martha sat down with a cup of tea, the glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows across the room. Martha turned to Robert, her eyes serious but filled with a quiet optimism. "Robert, I know we still have a long way to go, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you. You've been there for me in ways I never could have imagined. And I know I've hurt you, but I'm committed to making this work. I'm committed to us." Robert smiled, his heart full. "I'm committed to us too, Martha. I'm here, every step of the way. I love you, and I believe in us. We've been through a lot, but I believe we're stronger because of it." Martha smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reached for his hand. "I've never felt more certain of anything in my life. We've been given a second chance, Robert, and I won't take that for granted." Robert squeezed her hand, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over him. Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that they were truly healing. They were building something new together, something built on trust, honesty, and love. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain. They would face it together, no matter what. The end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this journey through Robert and Martha's story. It's been a story of love, betrayal, and the slow, steady process of rebuilding trust. Relationships take time, effort, and understanding, and I hope this story resonated with you. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.